I never worked it out, so I could never work a fill out. It comes in the emotion of the song.
Countless rumors and anecdotes kept the public interested in the inner workings of the Beatles, which propelled their stratospheric climb to stardom. Nevertheless, even after all this time, rumors and conjecture continue. Legendary musician and ex-band member Ringo Starr sheds light on the intricate dynamics that molded their path. Despite the rumored strife among the band members, one thing that has never been fully explained is how the Beatles managed to stay musically together, write some of the most memorable songs of all time, and deal with the complications of their troubled relationships. First, some background on the tragic loss of Ringo Starr of the Beatles. Only then can we dive into the details of the news. My first years of music. Richard Starkey, better known as Ringo Starr, became a legendary personality in the early 1960s after becoming a member of the Beatles. Although Starr was most known as the band's drummer, he also showed his songwriting chops on Octopus's Garden and added his distinctive singing to beloved songs like With a Little Help from My Friends. The working-class neighborhood of Dingle in Liverpool was the site of Starkey's birth on July 7, 1940. His troubled childhood was marked by sickness and family strife. He was an only child, Elsie and Richard Starkey Sr., divorced when he was only 4 years old. Because of this, his mother was left to raise him on her own. Notwithstanding these and other challenges, Ringo was doomed to achieve greatness. How then did it come to pass? In order to provide for her kid, Elsie worked relentlessly by herself, first as a housekeeper and then as a barmaid. Serious health problems exacerbated Starkey's upbringing. The procedure to remove his appendix was performed on him when he was 6 years old. But problems led to peritonitis, a potentially fatal illness, so he had to spend a whole year in a children's hospital. This lengthy break in his studies put him at a severe intellectual disadvantage. With the help of a committed instructor, he was about to catch up when he suffered yet another devastating setback. After Starkey's TB diagnosis, he had to spend 2 years in a sanatorium. These formative years of sickness and seclusion would shape Starkey's tenacious character, giving him a deep gratitude for life and an unfaltering optimism. During his lengthy stay at the sanatorium, the medical personnel used a number of techniques to occupy and divert the attention of the little patients from their sickness. An inventive approach would have been to encourage young people to establish an ensemble. This laid the groundwork for Starkey to become a renowned percussionist, even if they didn't know it at the time. Within the walls of this institution, he found his passion for drumming, feeling a feeling of calm and rhythm. He started tapping rhythmically on the wood furniture at his bedside with a mallet. At that same moment, his lifelong love for percussion began. In 1953, Starkey's mother, Elsie, remarried. His new stepfather, Harry Graves, had a good impact on him, especially in encouraging his budding musical talent. Graves encouraged and supported his stepson's musical endeavors while Starkey was in the sanatorium, which helped develop his skills. After overcoming his long struggle with TB, Starkey returned home in 1955 to face a bleak reality. There was no way he could go back to school after everything that had happened to his schooling. It was impossible to make up for the long time he had been out of school. Therefore, Starkey turned his focus to finding work. Over the years that followed, he worked in a string of forgettable jobs that fulfilled him in any meaningful way. But he did hear skiffle during these jobs, and that kind of music had a huge impact on his early career. The skiffle movement was a popular alternative to more expensive instruments for young musicians who could not afford to buy real ones. After being enchanted by the DIY spirit and boundless energy of skiffle, Stark quickly established himself as a regular performer with a neighborhood skiffle group. In 1957, Starkey got his first real drum set as a Christmas gift, which acknowledged his dedication to drumming. This was the beginning of his shift from playing for fun to using instruments fit for a professional. This laid the framework for his subsequent role as Starkey, the beloved percussionist of the Beatles. Starkey joined Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, a band with a more polished sound and real instruments, after acquiring expertise in the skiffle scene for a few years. This marked his move from playing in more casual venues around town to a more serious musical environment. As he stepped into his new job, Starkey assumed the stage moniker Ringo Starr, which would go on to become famous. His distinctive trademark, The many rings he sported on his fingertips inspired the name. It was a reflection of his taste in country and Western music as well. As Ringo Starr, he became famous for his energetic and charismatic drumming style, especially his drum excursion, which the band lovingly called Star Time. Rory Storm and the Hurricanes were a popular band in Liverpool and played regularly outside of the city. During one of these concerts in Hamburg, Germany, a star and a band of musicians on the verge of making history crossed paths for the first time. Stu Sutcliffe, John Lennon, George Harrison, Paul McCartney, and drummer Pete Best composed the youthful band known as the Beatles. Hamburg was the first meeting place for Starr and the Beatles. October 1960 saw the invitation extended to Ringo Starr to join forces in the studio with Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison. As a backing band for Hurricanes lead singer Lou Walters, they were recording a song at the time. The purpose of this session went beyond just recording. It gave an early glimpse of the simpatico in their music that would come to define the Beatles. The percussion by Starr, who brought a fresh depth to the music, hinted at its potential. When he formally joined the Beatles 2 years later, all of this promise would be fulfilled. Consequently, what happened after this? Okay, let's look into that. Embracing a Beatles fandom. In 1962, Ringo Starr officially joined the Beatles after taking up drum duties from Pete Best. Difficulties did arise throughout this change. When Best and Starr made their debut at Liverpool's Cavern Club, it was clear that their loyal fans were not happy. Starr was so upset by the lineup change that they even got a black eye for all the hate they received. Even though it got off to a rocky start, Starr's charm and skill won over the Beatles' fans. As the Fab Four kept performing and recording, the chemistry among them solidified. The crowd and his other musicians started to pick up on Starr's off-stage contributions, too, and that led to the seamless harmony that would come to define the Beatles' sound. After the release of their song Please Please Me, the band finally broke through in the English music scene. Their first album, also named Please Please Me, contributed to their early popularity and the growing phenomenon that was Beatlemania. In particular, Starr's participation in the song Boys stood out since he sang lead. His singing talents and pivotal part in the Beatles' dynamic were both highlighted by this. The Beatles started the British invasion the next year, 1964, when they embarked on a historic transatlantic journey to deliver their distinctive mop-top hairstyles and matching outfits to America. Their historic appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show demonstrated the great excitement that awaited their arrival. At the height of Beatlemania, when the band's song I Wanna Hold Your Hand had already soared to the top of the charts, the cultural phenomenon of the simulcast encapsulated the essence of the era. Many young, lovesick teenagers were among the many ecstatic fans that greeted the Beatles as they resumed their tour. In June 1964, despite the whirlwind of success, Ringo Starr had a setback with pharyngitis and tonsillitis. Starr was probably worried about Jimmy Nicol filling in for him on the road during his short leave. A few weeks later, however, Starr was lucky enough to be able to go back on the tour. The Fab Four first appeared in the film business in 1964 with the release of A Hard Day's Night, a documentary that perfectly captured their allure. As a result of their success, the Beatles released another film in 1965 called Help, which included a soundtrack CD with Starr singing Act Naturally. This project allowed Starr to hone his acting and comedy chops, which in turn enhanced the band's varied creative output. However, the band's career started to fall apart at the peak of its fame. The group breaks apart. When the Fab Four finally decided to call it quits in 1966, they played their last show of the year in August at San Francisco's Candlestick Park. With this move, the band was able to put an end to a chapter in their history and devote themselves fully to recording new songs, pushing the boundaries of popular music in the process. One of the first rock concept albums meant to be heard as a whole, 1967's Lonely Hearts Club Band by Sgt. Pepper was a watershed moment in this new era. Subsequently, the same year saw the release of the White Album, aka The Beatles. This album, which included songs from a wide variety of musical genres, did much to cement the Beatles' place in music history. One of the album's most notable contributions was Don't Pass Me By, the Starr's first solo work for the group. However, When they were making the White Album, tensions among the band members rose to a boiling point. Isolation set in for every member of the group as they felt more cut off from one another. In addition, Starr's removal from several recording sessions added to her feelings of estrangement. Starr, who felt more and more excluded, decided to temporarily leave the band and became the first member to do so. His departure further highlighted the pressure that had started to impact the band's cohesiveness. As soon as they realized their mistake, the Beatles gave Ringo Starr the credit he really deserved for their achievement. When his bandmates realized they hadn't given him the credit he deserved, they sent him heartfelt telegrams praising him as the best percussionist in the world, as a way to show their appreciation. Upon his return to the studio, Starr was met with a friendly and symbolic gesture that conveyed the band's gratitude and their wish to put the previous conflicts in the past. His drum set was set up to spell out "Welcome Back, Ringo" with a cascade of carnations. This kind gesture conveyed their pleasure and excitement upon his homecoming in a physical way. The band's commitment to finding a solution and strengthening their togetherness, at least temporarily, was shown by the gesture. After a long hiatus, the Fab Four were back together and ready to continue defining an era with their music. But the Beatles' togetherness was crumbling as their creative and personal disputes became worse. Ringo Starr spent time during this era of turmoil exploring options and interests outside of the band. He co-starred alongside the legendary Peter Sellers in the 1969 comedy picture The Magic Christian, which brought him widespread renown. On the London rooftop of Apple Corps Limited in January 1969, the Beatles gave their last live concert. Let It Be, a anecdotes film, chronicles the band's history at an impromptu rooftop concert, both symbolically and literally. The performance was the pinnacle. The band also made their last public appearance before breaking up during this performance. After Paul McCartney announced his departure from the group in April 1970, the Beatles officially broke up. With this announcement, one of the most groundbreaking and prosperous groups in popular music history came to a close. Over the course of their career, the Beatles achieved unprecedented success, with 45 songs reaching the top 40 in the U.S. alone. After the Beatles broke up, Ringo Starr started performing solo. His 1970 solo debut, Sentimental Journey, was a throwback to Tin Pan Alley Standard's CD. After Boku of Blues came out the next year in 1971, Starr made the switch to country music. He proved his versatility and openness to trying new genres with this album, which was a change from his prior work. Regardless of the several musical paths he took, Starr's continued success was due in large part to his magnetic personality and close ties with other artists. The fact that Starr never stopped working with his old bandmates is a major achievement in his solo career. Yoko Ono, George Harrison, and John Lennon all featured his drumming on many albums. He and Harrison had a really beneficial connection. Their teamwork resulted in the smash hit "It Don't Come Easy." The album was a smashing success, becoming Starr's best-selling solo album and producing 2 U.S. #1 singles. Along with his work with singer Harry Nilsson on Son of Dracula 1974, Starr also had appearances in films including 200 Motels 1971, That'll Be the Day 1973, and others. In 1972, Starr made a directorial debut with Born to Boogie, a documentary that focused on the band T-Rex. The establishment of Starr's own record label at this time also gave him more creative control over his work. Still, his mental health issues started to show themselves in his work life. Starr said that his battles with substance abuse limited his artistic potential. Still, in 1980, he co-starred with Barbara Bach in the comic film Caveman. The pair wed a year after their on-screen spark blossomed into a real relationship. Tragic events marked the second half of 1980, culminating in the murder of John Lennon. The McCartney family, Linda, Paul, George, and Starr composed All Those Years Ago in mourning for this tragic loss. After its 1981 release, Harrison's All Those Years Ago reached #2 on the U.S. singles chart. Reflecting the Beatles' everlasting friendship, the song was a moving homage to Lennon. The same year saw the release of Stop and Smell the Roses by Ringo Starr. Reuniting for the 1984 musical drama Give My Regards to Broad Street, Starr and McCartney reignited their long-standing relationship and artistic excitement. Another way that Starr gained new fans in the 90s was via his narration work on the beloved kids' TV shows Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. His reassuring voice and magnetic personality won over many young fans, who were blissfully ignorant of his legendary tenure with the Beatles. Shining Time Station, where Starr served as Mr. Conductor, further established his status in the children's entertainment industry and consolidated his engagement with the show. When Starr formed the All-Star Band in the 80s, it breathed new life into his music career. Dr. John, Levon Helm, Clarence Clemens, Joe Walsh, Niels Lofgren, Rick Danko, and Billy Preston were among the notable artists who made up this project's revolving lineup. The All-Star Band gained notoriety for its dynamic performances and collaborative attitude under Starr's direction, which he showcased via many live recordings and a plethora of tours. Time Takes Time, Starr's 1992 solo effort, signaled a marked return to form and received some of the highest critical praise of his career. His other solo efforts also continued to advance. After a 2-year hiatus, the Fab Four reunited to reawaken the magic of the 60s. John Lennon's Free as a Bird served as the basis for the first new Beatles song since the band's 1970 breakup. Part of the Beatles Anthology Project, a mini-series and CD set including in-depth interviews and reminiscences about their time together, involved this reunion. In addition to giving viewers a rare glimpse into the Beatles' private lives, this undertaking served as a sentimental touchstone for longtime and new fans alike. In 1995, Ringo Starr and his former Beatles bandmates released the single Free as a Bird, which quickly became a popular hit and reached number 10 on the charts. Following this smash hit, Lennon released Real Love in 1996, which topped the charts and earned positive reviews from critics. With these albums, the Beatles' legacy was revived. When Starr appeared on the VH1 Storyteller series in 1997, it was clear that he was still fully committed to his music and business. A companion CD documents his own reminiscences and insights into his experiences as a recording artist, which he discussed during this program. Starr released Liverpool 8, an album that paid homage to his roots and carried on his legacy of exploring uncharted musical territory. In 2008, almost a decade after his first, he joined other famous people at the E3 conference the next year to promote the Beatles Rock Band, a video game that was a smashing success, selling over 500,000 copies in its first month. Other notable attendees included Olivia Harrison, Yoko Ono, and Paul McCartney. With the release of albums like Ringo, 2012, and Why Not, Starr's solo career kept booming. Postcards from Paradise, 2015, and Memories of Home, 2010. In 2013, Ringo Starr released Photograph, a memoir that provided a unique and personal look at his time spent with the Beatles. His first venture into photography was this. The personal and previously unseen photos included in the collection, in Starr's opinion, conveyed his experiences more clearly than a conventional autobiography. He was able to broaden his story arc beyond the famous 8 years of Beatlemania thanks to the book. Starr and BMG signed a global exclusive deal in April 2018. In exchange for a hefty price, BMG acquired the rights to his compositions for the Beatles and his solo work, which includes acclaimed hits like Photograph and You're 16 and cherished classics like Octopus's Garden. With a fortune estimated at $300 million, drummer Ringo Starr is the richest man in the world. He is an inspiration to many other musicians and has maintained a steady position on the rankings of the top 10 percussionists. In light of this, how was it to play in the Beatles? Actually, he only recently shared his thoughts on the subject. An interview with Ringo Starr on the relationships of the Beatles. In an interview with Access TV's Dan Rather, Starr said that the group's relationships were far from perfect and remembered the regular arguments that occurred. Regardless, he stressed that from the moment they started recording, they always gave their song their all, no matter how heated their arguments became. As their lives outside of the band became more complicated with children and other responsibilities, Starr saw that their ability to keep personal issues and their artistic process apart was a major factor in their success. I find it fascinating that Starr highlighted Paul McCartney's role in the band's efficiency and concentration. Although other members of the band, including Ringo Starr and John Lennon, may have wanted to take a break. McCartney's legendary work ethic meant that he often took it upon himself to keep the band's musical output going. Starr said that McCartney encouraged the band to make more music than they would have otherwise, which allowed them to keep making music even when their excitement was low. Regardless of the fluctuations in their relationships, Starr was very grateful for the opportunity to work with his co-workers, whom he considered close friends. As Starr recalled a remarkable meeting with Elvis Presley, he noted the difference between the Beatles' friendliness and Presley's solitude. Presley often gave the impression of being alone, even if he was really surrounded by others. Starr, on the other hand, considered himself lucky to have the backing of his three excellent friends no matter how heated their arguments became. But, like with any tight-knit group, the Beatles had their share of arguments and squabbles. Crucially, however, their music, the glue that held them together through good times and bad, refrained from absorbing these tensions. Paul McCartney's work ethic, in particular, was the engine that kept the Beatles going strong. Even though he was known as a workaholic, McCartney's constant focus on the band's artistry was crucial to their success. McCartney, in the face of mounting pressure from fame and his own life, was the one who kept the band going. But in the end, the group broke apart. Consequently, why did the companions argue? A different view on the Beatles' split? It has long been believed that the band's manager Brian Epstein's death was the catalyst for their dissatisfaction and disagreements. Overly autocratic behavior was a hallmark of Paul McCartney's eventual leadership position. Yoko Ono, who was John Lennon's sidekick, was also an unbearable interruption. Furthermore, George Harrison withdrew due to his unhappiness with his ignored stuff. It is believed that the members' accumulated pressure reached a breaking point, and Abbey Road was produced as a departure album before their alleged creative rebirth. This version of events, however, greatly alters the reality. It is usually assumed that Epstein's death prompted the split. The portrayal of Paul McCartney as an autocratic leader, meanwhile, is also oversimplified. The other Beatles were dissatisfied when he started projects without their approval, although they usually respected his work ethic and sometimes found his attitude irritating. Another part that gets twisted is when John Lennon wanted Yoko Ono to be in the recording session. The presence of Yoko did not hinder creativity. Rather, what the band found at first annoying but later acclimated to was John's desire to involve her. Another inaccuracy in the chronology is the idea that George Harrison's unpublished material forced him to leave the band. Harrison tried to settle these disputes with Paul when his solo album All Things Must Pass was successful. Despite feeling relieved at the Plastic Ono Band's debut, John Lennon saw the band's difficulties as chances for renewal rather than a sign of inevitable deterioration. It is just not true that these difficulties were made worse and caused the breakup. Before the band's formal split, several matters were handled individually and settled. This simplicity was maintained by marketing campaigns that aimed to build a loftier, more dramatic mythos of the Beatles, getting beyond the myths and into the complex realities of the band's last years and their individual journeys is the only way to understand the true story. Internal commercial issues, rather than creative difficulties, were the primary factors that led to the Beatles' breakup. When the band broke up in 1970, they had already worked through many of the problems that people associated with it. Paul McCartney's domineering personality, which had been an issue in the mid-1960s, was no longer an issue when the band started recording Abbey Road because they had reached a new level of equality. Yoko Ono's presence, which was at first seen as an annoyance, had gradually become inconsequential during the sessions for Abbey Road, Let It Be, and the White Album. Songs from these albums are among the most recognizable from the band's career. After suffering from emotions of exclusion, George Harrison found fulfillment in his work on Here Comes the Sun and Something, while John Lennon found freedom and release via his artistic endeavors with the Plastic Ono Band. Despite overcoming these creative roadblocks, the band's final breakup was due to management issues rather than creative differences. The crux of the matter was the band's dispute over Alan Klein, their manager. Due to John Lennon's impulsiveness, the band had severe difficulty when he hired Klein without informing the other members. For Paul McCartney, who had doubts about Klein's business acumen to begin with, the mismanagement of Let It Be by Klein only served to heighten his annoyance. The conflicts here were about more than just art. Paul lost faith in the band's leadership and performance as a result. Even though the members of the Beatles kept in touch and created successful solo albums, Paul McCartney decided to officially disband the band in December 1970. Despite their public comments and internal conflicts, the Beatles were eventually disbanded when Paul filed his lawsuit. Until now, the band members had been secretly planning their future and still hadn't figured out how to balance their personal lives with their musical pursuits. The real breakup of the Beatles was characterized by Paul McCartney's legal action, which changed the conversation from how to stay together to how to split ways. In reality, the split was caused by individual choices and unsolved conflicts within management. As the final breakup of the band was legally recorded in legal papers in December 1970, it was clear that the Beatles had officially broken up. Based on both past and present instances, it follows that the idea that the breakup of the Beatles was crucial is erroneous. When looking at their career history in comparison to other bands, it's clear that their split was an exception rather than a predicted result. The Beatles were trailblazers because they were the first major band to face the scrutiny and challenges of long-term fame. Its romance had barely lasted 7 years when they reached its peak. Even when the band broke up, its members, all of whom were in their 20s, had plenty of untapped promise. It is not true that their split was due to a gradual decrease in quality. They continued to create outstanding solo work after they broke up. However, the breakup of the Beatles was not an inevitable result of their creative journey. Instead, it was due to avoidable factors such as interpersonal conflicts, poor leadership, and outside forces. On the other hand, this is now thought to be ancient history. How then did Ringo Starr handle his private life? The personal life of Ringo Starr. 3 children, Zach, Jason, and Lee, were born to Ringo Starr and Maureen Cox during their marriage, which lasted from 1965 until 1975. Like his famous father before him, Zach Starr has made a name for himself as a talented percussionist, playing with legendary acts like Oasis and The Who. The family's bond was strong even after they split up, and Starr was there at Cox's bedside when she died of leukemia in 1994. He wed Barbara Bach, Starr's second wife, in 1981. Despite facing many challenges together, including alcoholism, their marriage has been a rock of stability. They remained friends after finishing therapy together and continue to do so now. Starr became the first Beatle to become a great-grandfather in August 2016, and his family became even larger with the birth of 7 grandkids. In 1965, Ringo Starr was one of the Beatles who were awarded an MBE for their achievements and services. In 2018, the title of Knight was conferred to him by Prince William. Starr made the amusing observation that he was feeling a little shaky on his own today while contemplating over the knighthood. He also made sure he understood the gravity of the distinction. Without a doubt, the hero of this century. Well, it pretty well wraps up the subject for now. Thank you for paying attention. How entertaining was this video for you? To make sure you don't miss any of our future uploads, we would be grateful if you could like, comment, and subscribe if you did. It is very important that you watch the video that is now playing. It is just astounding.